Hi, and welcome to my sci-fi, fantasy, and horror short fiction roundup for April 2022. And if I sound different, um, it's because I'm very congested. I've got a head cold. So I don't know, maybe it'll sound worse, maybe it'll sound better like this. I'm not sure, but that's why I sound different. And the text version of this roundup is available as usual at Maria's Reading, which is my book/review blog. And I'm going to dive right in. My first story pick for this month is Upside Down Frown by Jared Thompson in Faya number 22. Thompson's story is it's a science fiction story. It's set in a future society that has gotten past a looming climate disaster, and which might, if you look at it one way, be some kind of, well, everyday almost utopia. There's a new treatment for physical and mental discomfort and pain, for example, called electroceutical surgery, a procedure that rewires the pain pathways in a person's nervous system. There's also a department of happiness, very Orwell-esque, which I love, which gives each citizen an in-depth life narrative analysis, advising them on how to set goals for their future and how to achieve those goals. And the newest thing in this society is a social cohesion project that is meant to heal intergenerational scars on the nation's psyche. Now, all of this sounds great, but of course, there is a darker side to this. Cassandra is the story's protagonist. She is not convinced that these things, as good as they may be for some things, are completely good for people or society. And in her work as a museum curator, she is putting together an exhibit that is meant to explore history and the human spirit in a more complex way than maybe the Department of Happiness would like. So he wants to explore the human spirit, which is wrought, tortured, pummeled, and yet enduring, as it says in the story. I love that line. And there's a sort of clash between Cassandra's work and what society sees as being the desirable thing that you should do and how you should deal with history and historical memory. Now, this is, to me, a brilliant science fiction tale that delves deep into what is really needed to achieve peace and real happiness for humans on an individual level as well as for society. And it sort of delves also into what we're willing to do, what we're willing to give up in order to live together. And do we need to give things up? And how do we have to change ourselves and society? And I really love how this story deals with these complexities. And I love how Thompson creates a world that is really neither a utopia nor a dystopia, but rather a place where different people are trying to figure out how to live. Highly recommended story from a great issue of Faya. My next story pick is Once on a Midsummer's Night by Vanessa Fogg in Giganotosaurus. Fogg is such a great storyteller. I love her work. And here she writes an epic tragedy that is also an epic fantasy and an epic romance, twisting together past and present in a beautiful and heartbreaking tale. There's the now, where a boy enters a garden that remembers him, and a garden that wonders if he will remember everything he needs to remember before the wheel spins again and the chance to heal what was once broken is lost again. And then there's the past, where a boy met a girl and they fell in love before wars and pain and darkness tore them and the world itself apart. Fogg tells her story with a gentle touch, but that only goes to make the story more powerful and make it cut deeper. I love how the grand sweep of a world falling into ruin is so intimately woven together with the personal tragedy of a man and a relationship being changed and torn asunder. My next travel story pick is The Travel Guide to the Dimension of Lost Things by Effie Seiberg at Podcastle, and it's narrated by Summer Fletcher. Now, Seiberg takes the serious issue of depression on here. And like real depression, where every small chore and act and movement seems too difficult to accomplish in your everyday life. And she twines that together with a uniquely imagined sort of portal fantasy, where the protagonist ends up in a different world where they are still plagued with the same depression that they deal with in the regular world. There may be no dragons to slay in this fantasy world. There are maybe no evil rulers to defeat, but there is definitely a quest and a purpose to go on, to live, and to find some kind of path to feeling better. It's a brilliant story that manages to both capture the awful inertia and heaviness of depression while also showing that there is hope, and without ever becoming maudlin or shallow like a motivational quote poster. Highly recommend the story also. My next story pick is Valor Bones by Derek Bowden in Beneath Ceaseless Skies. This is a terrific tale of terror and woe, of terrifying magic and people being used, even killed, for profit and gain. In Bowden's story, Letty flees her family and her home and ends up in the bog outside town. There, a monster is born. That is both part and not part of Letty herself. And Letty ends up feeding it words and stories, objects too, tales both real and fictional, and all the while the monster grows. But the horror in the story is not Letty's monster, but it is what's happening in her town and in her house and in her family. And as that gothic tale of dark deeds and horror is unraveled, Letty's monster finds its own purpose too. My next story pick is This Is I by Katie Breisky in The Deadlands. And if you've read The Lady of Shalott, you'll recognize this. I'm going to read a bit from the opening. High in her eyrie, Elaine adjusts the beams of her loom. Hot, motionless air slicks the space between her shoulder blades. Her fingers cramp. She ignores the ache, weaving with the dispassionate industry of a spider or a good Victorian housewife. Knights ride along the road 2 by 2, abbots, damsels, page boys, shepherds. Passing her taciturn tower, they cross themselves and shudder. Fuck them. And that's end quote. Now, this is a multifaceted masterpiece of a story. Breisky delves deep into art history, the way women artists are often minimized or entirely forgotten, both while they're alive and after, and how some women in literature and art have been stripped of their own agency in order to serve the narratives of men. And all of this is wrapped up in the most glorious prose and a story that leaps and soars through history, art, and art history. To quote Breisky from her Twitter thread about this story, she says, I got really mad about the way the pre-Raphaelites treated Elizabeth Siddal and combined my historical hot takes with a riff on The Lady of Shalott. My next story pick is actually a story from last year. It's Trowel Brush Bones by Audrey R. Hollis in Pseudopod, narrated by Iba Armancas. This is a great story. It's about a group of female archaeology students at a dig run by a male professor and his, also male, helper. And they are digging up artifacts and bones at a site that might have once been inhabited by witches. The past is unsettling here, both because of what might have happened then, and also because of how the remains are being treated in the present by the professor. Adding to the unease and tension is the ever-present specter of a professor who has a reputation for getting way too touchy-feely with his students. Hollis twines all the threads together into an unsettling, ever more disturbing tale where the bones seem to whisper stories into the dreams of the women who are there for the dig. I love the way Hollis uses second-person plural here, the we, and it adds a layer of complexity and depth to the story that makes it even more powerful. My next story pick is Knotlings by Aaliyah Whiteley in the Dark. Now, body horror, existential horror, psychological horror, this story has all that and more. I'm not even going to try to describe the central thing that happens to the narrator and her son in the story because it's quite out there. And it really is something that is best read within the context of the story. I can tell you that this story and the ways in which its central mystery can be interpreted will live in my head for a long time. Mother and son in the story both have the same condition, but in the end, it turns out that they deal very differently with what happens to them. And what the son does horrifies the mother, at least initially. It's an unsettling, deeply disturbing, and uniquely imagined story that is not easily explained, but it sure as heck packs a powerful punch. My next story pick is Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Stephen Graham Jones at Tor.com. Now, if you've read Stephen Graham Jones's book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, you'll know that the man has a real deep knowledge of and love for old slasher movies and old horror movies in general. In this story, Jones weaves in allusions to and a homage to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Yes, the sequel. And into the story about Jenna. And there are definite callbacks to Stephen King's Christine as well. There's a haunted, possessed, blood-drinking car. There's a revenge arc with Jenna's ex-boyfriend, and there's the unraveling of a mystery too, specifically the mystery of how Jenna's parents died. This story to me feels almost like a companion piece to My Heart is a Chainsaw, and I think that Jade from the novel and Jenna from this story might become very fast friends if they ever manage to meet. My next story pick is Beginnings by Christina Ten in Fantasy Magazine. If you love fairy tales, and fairy tales being twisted and reimagined in new ways, then this story by Christina Ten is definitely for you. I love all those things, and I love this story. Ten's story twists and loops around itself. It progresses, but comes back to the beginning, this beginning of the story, over and over again. And one of the quotes from the story is, "Beginnings can be beautiful, something worth lingering and lingering in." This is a love story, a romance, a tragedy, and a twisted fairy tale, and it is beautiful. My next story pick is also from Fantasy Magazine. It's called Collecting Inez by Lisa M. Bradley. I love this tale about Inez so much. Bradley tells an evocative and lyrical story about a girl who starts changing slowly but surely after ingesting what she thinks of as a small sun. Inez keeps changing throughout her life, much to the consternation of her family and others. Her powers and her connection to plants, and especially the way plants and trees react to her, end up making her life and eventually her career very interesting. And what happens after she dies makes for a transformative ending. I love Bradley's prose and the musical, poetic rhythm of this tale. My next story pick is An Expression of Silence by Beth Goder in Clark's World. And I'm going to read one of the quotes from the beginning of the story. "She will meet the sentient beings of Ekara Sea like this, with juice running down her chin, in her worn jogging pants. If she's going to die, she wants to be comfortable." This is a wonderful, subtle, and brilliant short story about first contact between humanity in the form of Riley, an astronaut from Earth, and Ifals of Ekara Sea, with the benefit of the doubt of having just a bit of trust and a lot of curiosity can bring about unexpected insights and adventures. It's a beautiful, subtle, finely crafted story. So, next up is Everything the Sea Takes, It Returns by Izzy Wasserstein in Lightspeed. Oh, what a story. This is near future sci-fi set in a world that hasn't exactly experienced an apocalypse, but is definitely in dire straits, both environmentally, socially, and politically. We follow Jess through her life, from when she loses her grandmother at 16, through love and loss, despair and hope. Jess keeps wandering the coast, up and down, here and there, and the sea takes and the sea gives, and the sea carries things away and might return them again. But nothing is the same, even if it comes back. Gorgeous writing. My next story pick is Where the Heather Grows by Shaoni C. White in Nightmare. Now, White tells a chilling, haunting, twisted tale of old sins, strange dark magics, and murder here. A story that is partly written in the form of emails, and which uses that epistolary format to great effect. Clara has a fear of water, even the sound of it, and definitely a fear of the feel of water. It haunts her and threatens to change her, or maybe change her back into something other. There's a great interview with White in Nightmare about the child ballads that were an important inspiration for this story. And in that, White says, the child ballads are a great example of this, which is why I became obsessed enough with one of them to twist it to my purposes in the story. The Cruel Sister, also known as Two Sisters or Wind and Rain. My next story pick is Writer Reviews for Ferryman Karan by Guan Un in Translunar Traveler's Lounge. This story is part of a terrific issue of Translunar Traveler's Lounge, and it serves up some slices of Greek mythology in a flash fiction story that is written as a series of reviews, all with responses by Boss Hades. It's funny, and it has a neat twist at the end. My next story pick is also from Translunar Traveler's Lounge. It's B-Bomb Bergamot's Telesympathic Space Cats by Adam Lee Weatherford. In the story, a former barista now sells virtual cats in a virtual reality called Telesympathic Space that has recently opened to paying customers. The former barista, aka B-Bomb Bergamot, has some objections to the new way of doing things in TS space. And while it seems BBB is playing along, well, there might be more to their welcome message than meets the eye. This is just a lovely science fiction flash story with something rebellious brewing beneath the surface. My next story pick is Heavy Possessions by Song Kim in Strange Horizons. Okay, so this story came out in early May. So I'm kind of cheating putting it in here, but I am sneaking it into this April Roundup anyway because I love it so much. It's about a young woman who's working online as a digital medium, pretending to be able to contact the spirits of the dead and communicating with the people who want to speak to them again. It's all a sham, but then something unexpected happens. The real spirit of a real dead woman enters her body for real. And I love how this story is so gentle, as these two very different people share the same body and find that they have things to learn from each other. It's a really glorious story and highly recommended reading. My final story pick for this month is Letters from Roger by Emily Sanders in Apparition Lit. And it starts off like this. June 22nd, Letty has died again. I thought that the sickness would stay gone from her, but it seems that the cure we were promised was a myth. Her mind took to the hallucinations quickly this time, and by 2 p.m. she had gone over into that place from which no one returns. This time, I think it is permanent. It is a quietly enigmatic and rather terrifying horror tale of a strange disease that we follow in a series of letters from Roger, as in the title. I love how the plain, straightforward style at the beginning of the story slowly morphs into something more twisted and dark as the story progresses. There are hints of quarantine and physical distancing here, but whatever this sickness is, it might be even more frightening than COVID. This story was the winner of the Apparition Literary Magazine March Flash Fiction Challenge, and I highly recommend you check out both this story and Apparition Lit. And that was all my story picks for this month. Thank you for listening to my congested voice. And I'll be back next month with another roundup. Thank you.